Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the MyFootballWriter YouTube channel. And this is the first of hopefully many exclusive interviews that we're going to be bringing to you on the channel. And who better to start with than one of our own and one of the Pinken's very finest? It's the one and only Connor Southwell. Connor, thank you ever so much for coming on. How are you doing, mate?
Oh, Freddie, it's very kind. Thank you. I appreciate the very kind welcome. No, it's lovely to be back. This is obviously a YouTube channel that I sort of started actually all those years ago. So it's brilliant to see that you've revived it, and I'm sure it'll be flourishing. So yeah, really nice to be back at what I describe as my spiritual home, MFW.
No, that's absolutely fantastic, mate. And thank you for your time. And you just said there, your spiritual home over MFW, of course, as you've just said there, you started here, and of course, you've gone on to much bigger things and a lot of big things for you in your career now, being with the Pinken and covering Norwich City almost on a daily basis, and of course, providing some great stuff along the way over the years you've done. So, how did that come about? Really, how did you sort of start off with MFW? How did that maybe leads to working at the Pinken and pretty much doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, I think I was about 16 when I first got in contact with Gary Gowers, who obviously runs the website. And at that stage, I'd written a few pretty poor blogs and had quite a few opinions. And basically, the whole thing started because I used to follow Norwich City away from home, and I'd get the coach there, and I used to go with my sister. And there's one game in particular, and I can't remember for the life of me what it was, but I remember being absolutely furious with what had occurred. And all the way back was just hammering it, just speaking constantly with opinions, and it was a bit like she wanted to put earphones in and just ignore me really. And it was at that point where I thought, maybe I should try writing this down really. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do then or how I wanted to do it, but that then took the form in terms of something written. And I thought, well, I'll give it a go and see what it's like. And yeah, I mean, the first ones were more like English essays than they were articles, but I really enjoyed it. And then yeah, eventually it was an email to Gary, who very kindly, as he does with everybody, I think, who contacts MFW, and I'm sure you'd have been through this process as well, Freddie. You speak to him, and he's very kind in giving you a platform and giving you a voice, but also he helped me a lot in terms of shaping how to write and teaching me a lot about yeah, almost finding my voice. Almost, I felt like that was a big process of what I did at MFW. And then yeah, after a few years of that, and doing some some stuff here on this YouTube channel, and getting to interview Stuart Webber and people like that, it was really brilliant experiences when I was 18, 17, 18. It was amazing, some of the positions that I was put into. And I'm forever indebted really to Gary and to Rick and to the guys at MyFootballWriter, because they did some brilliant things for me, as they will for you, Freddie. And yeah, it's a journey that I'm really proud of, and obviously that all of that stuff led me to the Pinkin, and this remarkably is my fifth year. It's going to be 5 years in September, so that's mega. That's a lifetime really. And as we were discussing, so much has happened in that period globally. So yeah, it's a little bit mad. But yeah, that is a very condensed version of it. But that's my journey essentially. And yeah, my football writer played a massive part.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fantastic to hear. Of course, we'll get on to all the stuff that you've been doing in those 5 years very soon. But yeah, as well, you mentioned there, just talk about, of course, starting off and mainly just being like English essays, of course. So really, how did, of course, with Gary as well, and you said there finding your voice. How did you maybe develop like your own sort of independent style of writing, maybe, or did you maybe learn that from asking other people, of course, as well, maybe even working at a Pink, and of course you've been with the likes of Paddy Davitt, who's been there for a long, long time. Of course, you mentioned there Rick Waghorn, the founder of MFW, who also was sort of the Paddy Davitt of yesteryear, pretty much. So yeah, how did you really sort of try and like get your journalistic style? Really, was that, as you mentioned there, was that mainly MFW doing that and sort of the guidance of your peers?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a process, for sure, and I maybe feel like I'm a lot closer to that. I don't know if there's a point where you think that you found it or whatever, but I certainly feel like I'm there, and probably in a year's time I'll feel like I've got it a lot more than I did the year before. So I think it's always an evolving process. I think when I first started out, I remember writing something and having in it. I won't name the person at all, but I remember writing a piece and sending it out to a few people, and I got one reply from somebody who was in the Norwich space, and uh, it was very good. Looking back, it was a very good reply. It was very constructive, but I was not in a place where I could take it very well, and so I didn't take it very well. I essentially stopped writing for for 2 weeks, and sort of like, yeah, I'm not very good at it. It's not for me, and just took a massive knock to kind of my confidence, really. Um, and eventually I did pluck up the courage to go again and write again. And that probably was one of the best things that could have happened to me, because I think it encouraged me, and you learn a lot about, and I say this generally, I think really if you've got a passion about something, it's only when you get knocked or something doesn't quite work and you have that moment of, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. And I think you find out pretty quickly as to whether that changes and whether it's actually, no, I do want to do this. And you use that process to kind of help you along the way, or you kind of let it, someone hits you on the head with a shovel and that's it, and you don't want to do it anymore. So I think that was a really key part of the process. And I mention this because I think after that I was a lot more conscious about, right, okay, how do I get better? How do I prove people wrong? How do I use that constructive stuff, which was very useful in its own essence, but how do I almost use that as motivation to go and do what I can do? And that meant that I started reading a lot more. And, I don't like to admit this now because I work with him daily, but Paddy, I read a lot of Pad stuff at the time. And, he's the GOAT as far as I'm concerned in terms of Norwich City writing. But I read a lot of other people as well, not just in the Norwich City space, but also, Gary was one of the other ones that I read, and he does some brilliant. Even now, I read his Sunday pieces after every game because it's really nice to get that perspective on it. Doesn't necessarily mean I agree with all of it, but that's part of it as well. But also people nationally as well. I read a lot of kind of national journalists as well, and I think that's kind of the best advice that I've given people is that, to read people, but don't just read them. I think you've got to almost analyze them, what you like about them, why their style you think works or doesn't work. And it's important that you see both sides of it as well. And sometimes that can be within the same author. There can be paragraphs that you really like the way they've constructed it and some that you don't. So I think that process helped me a lot in terms of structure, because I realized what these people were doing structurally. And that's the first sort of process, I think, because once you've got the structure there, then you can sort of play around with it and be a little bit more freer to it. I remember when I took the job, I'll mention this person, but Dan Brigham, who does some brilliant stuff in, has worked at Norwich City Football Club and was also on some other podcast, I think, which I'm not allowed to mention. I'm allowed to mention, but I won't mention it. But he told me, when you do a job like mine, it's almost like when you start, it's like being an opener in a Test cricket environment. Really, you've got to go there and defend some of the first few balls, and it's only once you find your rhythm a little bit and the ball gets a little bit older, then you can start opening up a little bit and trying to score and trying to hit boundaries. And that's been a really good bit of advice, actually. So I think it is a constant process, and I think it's constant evolution. And where I am today with it will probably be really different in a year. So yeah, I think it's probably experience based, it's sort of study based, um it's all of those kind of things, really. And hopefully I'm a lot closer to finding it now than I was 5 years ago. I definitely feel that, so I hope that's the case.
No, I'm very sure it is. Of course, you've done some outstanding work over the 5 years you've been there. And even one of the seasons, as you mentioned earlier, of course, a lot went on globally in the 5 years you've been there. Of course, one of those seasons, well, you were one of the only people allowed inside Carrow Road for the entire season. And that must have been a very interesting scenario to be in, of course, where there was, despite Norwich City probably playing the best football that
Mm.
maybe probably that you have seen, probably myself as well, all the fans that were able to experience it, of course, almost getting 100 points in that magical second season. You've got the fan shirt just behind you there that was worn when we've won that title against Reading on the second to last game of the season. But what was that like for you, and also maybe some of the other guys that were there with the Pinkin? Because that must have been just so bizarre to witness when you're one of probably about 30 people or 40 people in Carrow Road, and and 22 of those are players. So what was that like, really, to be there and experience that season?
Yeah, it was really mixed. I think obviously that first and foremost, there's part. Obviously, I was immensely privileged to be in that position. It was, as you say, really surreal. I remember having to park up at the stadium. You had to do a COVID test before you went there. You had to take almost like papers, and you had to have your temperature checked and all of those things. It was almost like going through security at an airport. It was a bit like that getting into the ground. And as soon as you did that, it was like mask on, and that was it. You had to obviously be separated at that point from anybody else. So it was a really kind of isolating experience, to be honest. So there was obviously a real gravity in terms of, there was a real weight, I think, on all of our shoulders, because as you mentioned, there was a real limited amount of people that were allowed in the stadium. And that meant the responsibility, and there's always a responsibility in this job to try and convey to obviously the people who aren't there, but also people who are there, certain messages and the important strands of the day. I think that was even more magnified in that period. And I think you're wrestling with that, and you're also wrestling with the difficulty that you are there because you know that so many people can't be, and that's very, very difficult, I think. And that's something that I found really difficult to deal with in that period, to be honest, is that, you know, as you said, Norwich were doing incredibly well. It's one of the best seasons that I've ever seen. Emi Buendia, one of the best individual players that I've ever seen in any season. And yeah, it was almost like I was in a TV show, and everyone else was kind of watching it behind the screen, but I was there on set watching it play out. It was so bizarre, and really difficult. And it is going to be one of those experiences, I think, in many years to come, where I tell grandchildren, and I tell my son who's 4, so he can't really comprehend it yet, but at some stage he will be of an age where he can comprehend that type of thing, and it's going to be an experience that I talk to him about and share about. So it's a real mix, I would say. There's the privilege. There's also the surrealness of it. It was so bizarre. Norwich, as you say, won the championship, and I remember in that final game, I can't remember who it was against at home. So much of it is a blur, but they came out to celebrate, and it was almost like there was no music playing, and the players were almost like confused. I remember Jordan Hugill, who's a top guy, actually came out, and the most sort of celebration that they could muster was him picking the ball up and kicking it over the City stand. That was essentially it. It was so strange. And then so you've got those two, and then you've got the one that I found really difficult to deal with, which, as you said, is the fact that so many people, and football means a hell of a lot to people. It's so important for their mental well-being, the community, and that sense of community. Some people who don't get much social interaction, but get on a Saturday to interact with loads of people, and it's kind of what they base their life around. That was very difficult, I think, to comprehend. So it was a mixture of all of those things, and yeah, I was so glad when it came to an end, because it's just not the same. It was really bizarre, a goal being scored, and the only thing that you could hear. I think the one thing I would say with my kind of football geek hat on is the one bit that I found really interesting that you don't get now in stadiums with crowds. On generally, you do sometimes, but every communication from coach to player, player to player, player to official, sometimes even player to executive and executive to player. You could hear it all. So that was a really interesting peek behind the curtain. But yeah, I would have swapped it. I would have swapped that title winning season for a million relegation seasons with fans in. If I'm being honest, that's kind of my view on it, which sounds bizarre, but yeah, that's the case.
Yeah, that's certainly that's a very interesting comment. I would imagine a lot of people wouldn't have expected you would have to say that at all, of course, with just how well it went and everything. But as well, you mentioned there, of course, about the communication you can hear throughout the entire players. Now, with being as careful as you can and not being expletive, maybe or even if you're allowed to say it, I don't know the rules. But what do you think was maybe the most sort of the best call you heard, or something, or was there something that just took you back and just sort of I don't know, just made you think, what on earth is going on? This happens all the time.
So the one that stands out to me was Norwich played Watford at Carrow Road, and there was I can't remember if it was in the no, it must have been the Championship one, I think, because Isco Munoz was in charge of Watford, and there was an exchange between Daniel Farker and Troy Deeney. I can't remember the exact nature of what was said and what was toing and fro in there, but I remember Farker, to his credit, for a minute or two, did stand up for himself, and then got to a stage where he just thought, I'm going to leave it now, and sat back down in his dugout. But I remember that being a particular highlight. There was, I can't remember the player in. Oh, it was Neil Warnock, of course. He came with his
Yeah.
Middlesbrough team, and I remember some comments to Emi Buendia, which was, they marked him out of the game. To be fair, tactically, I think they got him sent off in the end. But as he was coming off the pitch, I think Warnock turned to him and said, "That's the only way we could defend against your son," and that was a real good one as well. So that it was those kind of snippets that you got, and that was really insightful and really interesting from a really sort of geeky perspective. But otherwise, just the general sort of, and I didn't play, but if I would have played, I would have taken a lot of the calls and stuff that people use and taken them to a Sunday league pitch. So yeah, it was really fascinating, and that was one element that I probably found the most interesting of the whole experience, I think.
Yeah, no, of course, as we've already discussed, such a surreal experience having to do that. And now, of course, it's been a few years, it's been back with the fans, and you already mentioned about how you'd gladly swap that. But that sort of shift, once that all started beginning again, of course, we're back in the Premier League. The opening day, I believe it was Liverpool at home.
Mm.
And then, so what was that like to sort of that must have been an interesting one as well. Even maybe just a pre-season friendly before that. I think there was Gillingham at home before
Gillingham,
that as
yeah.
well. And then that must have been very, that must have been so odd for you, having been, of course, sat up there in the press box as one of a few people. And the next thing you know, you're looking around and you've got all four corners of the stand open. And of course, there was those few games where it was just in the Gerald stand where there was 2,000 people allowed the odd time. That must have been quite refreshing to see as well. Just some people in there and a bit more noise, that rather than Warnock telling Buendia, yeah, that's how we defend you.
Yeah, it was. It was such a relief because I'm sure, like everybody, there were points during that season, and you come out of lockdown, you go back into lockdown, and all of those various elements and whatnot, and you think, blimey, this is never going to end. And what if we never, or how do we fully get back to stadiums being full and reopened and hearing on the ball city? We didn't hear that for a year really. That's a crazy thought. So to go from nothing to everything all at once was, yeah, incredible. And I remember that Gillingham game being, it was quite emotional actually. And the Liverpool game was really emotional. That first Carrow Road return and on the ball city, it was, yeah, you had a lump in your throat, and I think everybody did because it meant so much. And at that stage, maybe less so thereafter, but at that stage, it was almost like what happened on the pitch was irrelevant. It was, people going back to football, getting back into their routine, seeing the people that they've seen over a long period of time, and then hadn't seen over a long period of time, and kind of getting back to that. So everything about that was incredibly emotional, incredibly enjoyable. I think, irrespective of how the football panned out. And obviously, the season in the end didn't go the way that anybody wanted. And Carrow Road actually thereafter for quite a long period, maybe since the last 6 months or so, had been quite a tricky place for Norwich to play at, and hadn't been a particularly nice place to go and watch football. So, yeah, it was incredibly interesting, and even for me to observe, really really difficult to then try and put into words. Because it was something that was palpable, but it was almost like you had to be there to experience it and to experience that emotion. I didn't see anybody in tears in any of those occasions, but there was a lot of emotion in the place, and that, I think, probably more than anything shows the power of the game that we love and support and follow and report and cover on.
Yeah, of course. So, as you already mentioned there, as to how important to mental health it is, of course, even, well, we talk about mental health in Norwich City, of course, the video they produced during this, believe it was either this season or last season, of course, a fantastic video. And as well, with, well, even June being Men's Mental Health Month, of course, it's so important. And, as you've already mentioned there, football is, well, it can be the key to someone's livelihood, can't it, really? And of course, well, even it being your job as well. I mean, that must just be brilliant. Your job just being writing about football matches. And again, that's just surreal feeling, surely. Like, just genuine, just being to be able to go all over the country and all these trips, much like, well, as you said at the beginning, you were doing as a fan with your sister on Club Canary or Club Cabbage and going up and down the country and ranting after games. And now, you're in positions to sit with managers that, maybe a few years ago, of course, well, as any fan does, I'm not even going to hold back and say I don't, because we all do, of course, ranting and raging about managers or raving about them as well. But again, that must be something as well. You now are in such a brilliant position where you can sit in all these press conferences and you can see how managers describe games. I mean, I was lucky enough with Radio Norfolk to share the gantry with them when we played Bristol Rovers. And of course, I saw you in there, Sam Seaman in there, and Paddy, and you just all sat there in that front row, just taking in everything David Wagner was saying at the time. That must just be incredible as well. You get to sit there and just pretty much the most prestigious individual that you could have thought of as a fan. And then next thing you know, you're the one asking him all the burning questions and you want to get that information.
Yeah, and it's something that I've never taken for granted. I think for when I've done this role, it's an honor really to do this role. As you say, I was a Norwich City fan. I understand the importance of it, and I think it's been difficult at times in the role that I've done to do this. And I remember when I started, well, two things really, and I think one true, one probably not. The one that maybe isn't true is people who said to me, oh, well, you're gonna have to kind of take all emotion out of it, and I kind of don't think that's true to an extent. I think I always describe it as like sometimes you put in being able to put that hat on is really useful, and sometimes it does mean you're over emotional and you have to pick the right moments to do it. But I think there have been cases absolutely where I've almost put the fan back out, a hat back on, and sort of gone, right, okay, so how would I feel in these type of situations? And so that's the one I think maybe I've not used. The one that I have used is right because it does change the way you feel about it, like you say, because you have to think about things slightly differently. And the relationship is, I still absolutely adore the club and what it represents and what it means, but it is a slightly different dynamic to when you're a season ticket holder or when you're in the stands, because you have to think a little differently. You have to probably be a little bit more miserable and naturally skeptical than fans would be, and probably a lot more realistic as well. But to be honest, I was quite like that anyway as a fan, so that's not been too jarring a change. But it's definitely a different sort of relationship, I would say. So yeah, it is an honor, and I think also, and again, this is kind of where I speak about the sort of pressure of it and the gravity of it, because I think I can only speak for me really, but I know Paddy feels it and Sam feels it as well. We are there really to kind of ask the questions that fans want to know, and let's be frank about it, they're not always easy questions. I've had to ask David Wagner, who by all accounts was excellent to deal with, and a really intelligent, switched on guy, and to deal with from a media perspective was that you always have, I think probably some run-ins at various points with managers to varying different degrees, but he was always very good. And asking him about his future and about someone's job and their own job is immensely difficult. Which it doesn't make me laugh when you still get the comments about why don't you ask the tough questions. It's like, well, we probably do, but equally, you can't absolutely go in on someone and then you have to speak to them a week later. You've got to try and maintain a relationship with these people. And that means sometimes I've asked questions that I disagree with before personally, and I've had to ask questions that I disagree with because I feel like it's relevant, or there'll be people that want to know the answer. So yeah, it's a very difficult thing, and you have to kind of juggle and spin plates, and you have to weigh up what you think is relevant and what isn't relevant, and that invariably means sometimes that you miss something, and if you miss something, people notice that. And sometimes you can ask a question. I remember on one occasion this season where I asked a question that people maybe thought was wrong of me to ask. So there's both sides of it and whatnot. And yeah, I don't think I've ever taken that for granted. And you do invariably feel that pressure because, as you say, you're speaking to the individual that fans want to hear first and foremost. And there is a very it's like a sparring contest, really. It's a very interesting kind of environment. As you say, you've been in a press conference. It's very it's different to real life, really, different to a normal conversation, and they can be quite difficult to navigate, particularly as I said when things maybe aren't going too well. So yeah, it's a privilege, and it's one that I think everyone, certainly that I work with, take really, really seriously and do, because as I say, all we are really is a vehicle for fans to get answers and for fans to have their questions answered, and that's what we've always tried to do, with probably some nonsense spouted in podcasts and whatnot along the way.
No, of course, but as well, you of course, in the 4 years you've been here, there's been four different managers. Well, Alan Russell technically a manager, but when he had to stand in for a little bit. But of those four individuals, of course, including, as you've already mentioned, David Wagner, who you said was a pleasure to work with, and but as you even mentioned there, he's had, of course, a lot of fans believe that he was a truly very nice person and was a very likable character to get behind. Of course, there was also Dean Smith and Daniel Farker. Of those four, who would you say maybe that you enjoyed being in a press conference the most with, or you had maybe the most sort of standout moments where you thought, oh yeah, that's a lovely comment, what a great person, or they gave you like just a very good answer and you thought, yeah, that's absolutely brilliant, that's what I need, I can answer, as what you were saying there about, I can answer what the fans wanted, that's a brilliant answer. So who would you say of those four was the best at that, really?
I think the best orator was Daniel Farker. I think that's inevitable. I can give you one example. I remember when we used to do press conferences over Zoom, a bit like how we're chatting now. And Tom Williams, who works for BBC Look East, came on, and I can't remember exactly what the topic was or what it was or whatever. But Daniel had this unique way where he would almost know what he wanted to say about, if he had something on his chest, he'd kind of get it out there pretty quickly, irrespective of what the question was. And the way sort of news channels work a little bit different to us, really, because they are looking really for kind of a 30-second hit. So they
Yeah.
want sharp, sort of snappy quote. And I remember Tom asking him a question in a forum like this, and he got a 13-minute reply from Daniel Farker, and it and it cut back to him, and he almost lost all color in his face, and he was like, I can't even remember what I asked, to be honest. But Daniel was a bit like that, but he was very engaging. he was very clear with his messaging, and I think that's a key reason as to why he was probably so successful at Norwich, because he had a real knack at bringing people with him. And look, I had a run in with that with Daniel quite publicly. But I love listening to him. I always felt that I came away from his press conferences feeling like I was thinking a little bit differently about something. And I think it was quite rare for him to say something that I walked away going, "Oh, yeah, I don't agree with that," which hasn't always been the case with some of the managers that Norwich have had in the period that I've supported them, let alone in the period that I've done this job. So yeah, for me, Daniel Farker probably was the best natural communicator. But that's not to say the others weren't. I think, funny enough, Dean Smith and people, are surprised when I say this. I think, I understand, and I don't think I think he would say, I'll try and be polite. I think if he was here, he would say there are things that he could have done differently and communicated differently. But I always found him to be perfectly pleasant and similarly to David, really. You would ask him a question, and he would answer it. There was a little bit of prickliness at points, but I think that was probably demonstrated in the latter part, and you always kind of get that towards the end of a tenure. But by and large, I found him pretty good, and he was sort of the first real manager that I had actually sort of led a press conference with. So he was always very respectful of probably what was some dreadful questions at the time. So yeah, individually they were all interesting, but I think Daniel was unique and just was very good at getting a message out there and using the press really to get the messages out there in a certain way that he wanted them out there. And that was, I think, a key reason as to why him and his project was so successful, but also why right at the start he was probably afforded the amount of time that he was, because he was so capable at speaking and bringing people along with him with a journey and probably explaining context behind stuff. And if you can do that, then I think as a coach, that's probably half the battle.
Yeah, definitely. And what a journey it was, of course, those two fantastic promotions. Of course, relegations very much dampened it, but still, that was what a ride it was. And as well, of course, you're going to be having a new person to deal with in a few months with Johannes Hoff-Thorup being the new manager. Of course, you've done plenty of research, all the guys at the Pinkin have done about him and his ideology. It's a very exciting appointment. Of course, there's so much excitement around that. How do you feel in terms of in a journalistic way? Of course, you'll be able to speak to him and see his insights on things. How excited are you in that area of work? Are you ready for this? Are you as excited as the fans are with his appointment in terms of being able to speak to him across the new season?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's incredibly exciting, and I think watching his club interview, it's hard not to be excited by some of the stuff that he's saying, because I think naturally they're not like for like, and it's very different. It's very different contextually, but I think there is sort of shades of Daniel Farker, and that's probably more around sort of how it's happened and him as a profile rather than him as a personality. But yeah, absolutely, the geek inside me from a journalistic perspective is absolutely excited to learn more about him and how he speaks and how he's going to tackle certain questions and the way he's going to sort of deal with us individually. I think that's always really interesting, and I think it's almost now, and I think David, to be fair, probably suffered with this a little bit. I think it's really different for managers now, because there was an age where press conferences weren't live tweeted, or they weren't put out in full in video form, and every word that a manager said, or what, so there's 46 games, they do pre and post, that's what, 90 plus press conferences across the season. If you go far in the cup competitions, maybe even 100. If we're talking 100 press conferences a season, every word that you say is not going to be perfect. It's not going to, you're not going to get the tone or the messaging absolutely bang on. And in an era where everything gets micro-analyzed and picked apart, I think it is such a key pillar now that managers can communicate in a really good way. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see how he stands up to that challenge. And often, actually, you learn more about managers and head coaches, and how they sort of conduct themselves when things aren't going well, more so than when they are. So, yeah, I'm really excited off the pitch, but also on the pitch as well, because I think we could all sense it last season that it felt like there was probably it felt like it was probably the right time for a change. And yeah, change is always exciting, I think, if not scary, particularly in Norfolk. Us people in Norfolk don't really like change. So yeah, it's gonna be good to kind of see which direction he takes it, and yeah, like everyone else, really looking forward to it.
Well, there you have it. Even the journalists are excited about Yanis Thorup and what's coming up for Norwich City in the future when the new season begins. Connor, again, thank you ever so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. And it's great to see you back on MFW. Hopefully, the first of few times, or many times even. We'll have to wait and see, of course. It's going to be a very busy time period for you up until now, until, well, this time next year, really. You know, I can imagine the work never really stops. But again, thank you for taking time out of your schedule. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. And thank you ever so much.
No, thanks, Freddie. Good luck. Good luck with the channel. And yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to come back on. It's going to be good. Thankfully, I've got you've caught me right at the end as so my brain might be a bit mushy at this point, but I'm about to have a fortnight off, which is needed after managerial switches and everything that's happened. So yeah, I'll probably turn the phone off for a week and go to the beach somewhere. That's the plan anyway. So yeah, been a pleasure. And yeah, I always follow MFW very, very closely. So I'll be keeping a close eye on what you're doing, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you very much, Connor. You can go enjoy Galston Beach or any beach you want, mate. Take it easy. And again, thank you ever so much. And thank you to those who have watched this video. And we'll see you again for the next one.